بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. اللهم افتح لنا فتوح العارفين وفقنا توفيق الصالحين. اللهم علمنا بالقرآن وذكر الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما يقربنا منك برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا سهلا. اللهم أعذنا من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. أصلح لنا شأننا كله، لا إله إلا أنت، أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم تسليما. نويت التعلم والتعليم والنفع والانتفاع، تذكر التذكير والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على تمسك بكتاب الله وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم، ودعا لنا هدى دعاة الخير ابتغاء وجه الله مرضاته وقربه وثوابه سبحانه وتعالى، وما نوينا شيخنا من صالح النيات والأعمال. Alhamdulillah, welcome. We're going to actually, in this session, we're going to do some reviewing. What I did was I changed some of the slides and added some material, took out some material, highlighted some materials. So just partly from some of the feedback that I was given. So inshallah, hopefully it will be clear. And we're not going to go over all of it today. So there's going to be, inshallah, there'll be one more session. And that will be next Thursday, inshallah. I'm trying to adjust the... Okay. I'm trying to adjust the camera as we speak. Bismillah. Okay, so I'm going to review and mostly old material, and inshallah there'll be some new material as well. I'm also going to make the background a little bit darker, so hopefully you can see the slides better. So again, this is according to the Maliki school, and primarily the books that I took from were the Mukhtar Salkhalin, which is it's the fatwa book of the Maliki school, and I also took from the Risala of Ibn Abi Zayd al-Qayrawani, and he was known as the Al-Malik, and it's one of the main texts that's studied in the Maliki school. It's obviously has much less material than Mukhtasar Khalil. Okay, so again, we're going to review some stuff. So I just wanted to review the fiqh terms. This is we did these in when we started the section on worship, but I just wanted to review them. Fard and wajib, but this is the same thing in the Maliki school for the most part. It's an obligatory action. There's a reward associated with it, with performing the act, and a punishment associated with leaving it. Sunnah mu'akkada, confirmed action, reward associated with performing the act, no punishment associated with leaving it. Mustahab or mandu, recommended actions, same as sunnah mu'akkada, but lesser reward. And I mentioned the confirmed sunnah, that it is the Prophet basically didn't leave it, but there just wasn't enough proof to put it in the higher category. So I've noticed what the Malikis considered as a confirmed sunnah. It seems to be much like their criteria seem to be higher than the criteria in some of the other madhahib for putting stuff in this category. So it's like I asked one of my teachers, because I was taught that it's basically the Prophet didn't leave it, but there wasn't enough proof to put it in the fard category. So that's how strong it is. The sunnah mu'akkada. Then the mustahab, which is lower, it's so again, this is fiqh terminology, and sometimes generally outside of the fiqh class, you'll hear them saying, that's the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. So that just means the way. So they're not talking about the fiqh terms, because this is all his way, right? But in fiqh terms, you differentiate. And that's why it's important when somebody's speaking to know what, are they speaking in fiqh terms, or are they, just talking about the way of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Makruh is a discouraged act, so there's a reward associated with leaving the act, but there's no punishment associated with performing it. Haram is an impermissible act, there's a reward associated with leaving the act, and punishment associated with performing it. So associated again, because I mentioned that Allah can He accepts whatever He wills. So we're commanded to go by these rulings, and then whatever and then so the Salihin, what they would do is they would ask Allah to accept their actions, because they never felt safe that they had done it, because Allah Ta'ala is He accepts only what's sincere, and so they would only so they would ask that actions be like after the fard prayer, and after doing good actions, they would ask Allah to accept their actions, and not assume that they were automatically accepted, meaning that they would automatically get rewarded for it. And Allah make us from the people that are close to Him, that our wrong actions get turned into good actions. So that's a dua that some people do, some of the righteous do, and it's the meaning is there in the Quran. So may Allah turn our bad actions into good actions. Okay, attributes, legal responsibility. So when is a person considered legally responsible? He's mukallaf, so he's responsible for his own actions. So when he is or she is, these are the things, these are the rulings that would apply. So there are certain things that become fard, there's certain things that are fard, they're an individual obligation, like things that you're responsible for yourself, so that somebody else does it, it doesn't fulfill your responsibility. Like somebody can't pray for you, somebody can't fast for you, things like that. And then there's the collective fard, right? So if some people do it in the community, it suffices for everyone. But if nobody does it, then the sin falls upon everyone, and on anyone who's able to do it. So if there's not enough scholars in the community, and people are, committing sin because they don't have anybody to teach them, anybody who's able to actually pay for somebody to study traditional knowledge, or pay for them to go overseas, or free up their time so that they don't have to work, they would have to do that, or provide a space, or bring a teacher to the class, pay for the teacher, whatever it takes to get them to teach. If they're able to do that and they don't do that, and because of that people are ignorant, then everybody's sinful to the level of their ability. So that's pretty scary in this day and age, when a lot of things, especially in the West, have been open. We have a lot of means available to us. And then sunnah. So again, it would go back to, there's a reward associated with doing it, and there's no punishment associated with leaving it. There's the ayn, like the witr prayer, the Eid prayer, and then there's the kifaya, which is collective, like the adhan or hijama or iqama, right? And then there's things that are lower than the sunnah, but higher than a nafil, like the 2 rak'ah before the fajr. Sorry, there's a mistake here. Before the fajr of subh. The Malikis actually put it in its own category. So it's actually called the fajr, called the fajr prayer. So in the Maliki, the subh is the fard, and then the fajr is actually the 2 non-obligatory before the fard. Okay, and then another review, puberty, any one of these signs marks the onset. So a fleshy part of the nose becoming distinct, and one of my teachers mentioned that he can actually see that in some of the youth that come to visit him when they, when this becomes evident. And I've actually noticed it a little bit now that I'm more aware of it. Enlarging of the bone in the center of the neck, it's, I think, typically called the Adam's apple. Deepening of the voice, thickening of the epiglottis, maybe, Allahu alam, coarse pubic hair. So any one of these alone marks the sign of puberty, and then that person is responsible. So that's why it's really important. Stench of the axillary area. You'll notice sometimes the teens, they tend to be a little bit stinky. So enlargement of the breasts, ejaculation. So this is male or female, and then this is specific to women: menses, or pregnancy. Now, if none of the above signs are present, then reaching 18 lunar years. Right, and this is taken from Imam Sawi's Johara. Johara is one of the traditional Aqidah texts that is studied. So this epiglottis is that piece in the throat that closes the windpipe during eating, so that we don't choke ourselves. Alhamdulillah, there's all kinds of blessings to be aware of, to be grateful for. SubhanAllah. Okay. And then just a little bit more review. So marriage carries 5 potential rulings. So you have to ask yourself, okay, what is the ruling? If you're not married, what is the ruling for me marrying? So the default is that it's recommended. So not knowing something about the person, I would say marriage in of itself is recommended. But it could become obligatory, or it could be permissible, or it could be disliked, meaning makruh, or it could be prohibited. So obligatory is somebody's, they're thinking about getting a girlfriend or a boyfriend, and, they have a lot of desire, and fasting does not curb the desire, right? Fasting does not curb the desire, and self, doing stuff, seeking pleasure from the self, that's not permitted. One would have to, in this situation, marry. One would have to, in this situation, marry. Somebody who's not, and a lot of youth fall into this category, and sometimes parents will say, get a degree, get this, get a house, this, that, and the other, and people are falling into sin, and then then they get married later, and there's not, because of all the stuff they've done, or they've looked at things, they have all these strange expectations, and it causes a lot of problems in the marriage, including all the darkness that comes from doing haram, and it taking some of the barakah away from some of these marriages. So, parents really need to reconsider and be honest with their children. I know people here who got married at a very, very young age, and they're very happily married, and people who got married later and they got divorced. So it's a matter of who we are as people, and how much we're willing to sacrifice, and how much self-work we've done, as they say, here in the West. So the younger one is, the more one's able to, adjust oneself and learn and grow, and the less set one is in one's ways, and that works both ways. Okay, so it's permissible if the person is not desirous of children, no inclination to marry, they don't have a strong sexual desire, or they're worried about they might do something haram. It's makruh if the marriage will be a preventative from righteous, non-obligatory actions, right? But I just feel that most people don't actually, in our day and age, don't fall into this category, because how many people are actually doing, mashallah, a lot of people are doing nafil work, but, sometimes there's a lot of mixing of men and women, or stuff happens that, because they haven't studied their fiqh first, that they're kind of mixing. And so for mashallah, it's great that they're doing nafil and charity work, but majority of people need to learn their fiqh first. But if somebody's like studying, for example, they're a full-time student of sacred knowledge, and they're not afraid of falling into haram, and they're not having all these thoughts, and they're able to stay away from the opposite gender, then for them it would be disliked to actually marry, because what they're doing is for the community, and so it's higher. They might be fulfilling a fard or fard kifaya, or working towards fulfilling a fard kifaya, meaning like they're learning so that they can teach people in their community, so that would be higher. Somebody who's unable to provide basic necessities, so it'd be prohibited for the man if you can't provide basic things like basic clothing or basic food, basic shelter, not the extras. And in our area, actually, a car is also considered a necessity. So when somebody needs to go to the grocery store, I mean, taking the bus is, would take hours. It's not, it's very difficult. But one doesn't need to have, a fancy car. So just a basic car. Or if he'll provide with her with impermissible wealth, like he'll, work in a bank, a ribawi bank, which majority of these banks are, and they're not afraid of. Sorry, just want to make sure I'm on the. I actually have 2 copies of this. I think I want to change this because it's confusing. What I meant here is they're not afraid of illicit relations. Oops. So because if they're afraid of illicit relations, they would, have to get a halal job, and do something to, so that they can get out of the a possibility of doing haram. So it's somebody who's unable to provide for their spouse, and they're going to be oppressive to them, and they're unable to perform intercourse, so they can't fulfill basic needs of the person, or they know they're going to be oppressive, then it would be prohibited for them to marry. But majority of the youth are falling into this category. Or people, maybe they're single and they say, oh, I don't need to get married right now, but they're actually, spending time watching TV, or they're spending time, wasting time in and of itself is makruh. It's the most precious thing that's been given to us. So in and of itself, it's makruh, it's discouraged. So they're leaving something that might be recommended for them, or at least permissible. And then they're doing something that's makruh. So they've had the spouse, they would serve them, they would work, they would maybe remember Allah together, and somebody who would bring them closer to Allah. So sometimes sisters at a certain age, they'll say, okay, I don't need to get married, but then, how are they spending their time? Is it mostly, are they doing more shopping, because they're feeling lonely, they're watching a lot of TV, they need to think about that. And it's important to talk to somebody who knows you, who can give you a fiqh ruling. Okay, the pillars, so without which a marriage contract wouldn't be sound. So nikah has the meaning of the actual contract, and also has the meaning of dukhul, of consummation. So here I'm using it, the meaning of the actual contract. The original meaning in the language was dukhul, was consummation. So okay, the pillars are the guardian, right? And some of these, there is a difference between the Maliki and some of the other schools. So these are pillars: dowry or sadaq, 2 upright witnesses, husband and wife to be, mahal, like who is the what is the place where the contract, what's the essence of the, like, who is it enacted upon? Is the wife, the husband and the wife. So mahal, wording, and kahtu, zawajtu, it's past tense, because that shows that it's done, versus if you put it in the present tense, that could be a promise, because the present tense in the Arabic language, it indicates the meaning of present and future. So that could be a promise. So it's ankahtu, zawajtu, and then there's khilaf about some of the other wording. So, but these mentioned in Mukhtasar Khalil, which is the fatwa book, this wording, or sigha means this form, this is the basic, right? The wording, and then you'll get into different opinion about the other wordings. And Okay, and then going back to upright witnesses, once must spread the news once a contract has been made, and this is what this practice of the Sahaba was, is that they would have a contract and then they would go out and just tell people. And this is one of what Sheikh Sadiq mentioned to me, that they would go out and they would just tell people, I married so and so. So you in the Maliki school, you need to announce it. You have to announce it. And if it's, an upright person by fiqh definitions is somebody who doesn't do major sins. So they don't backbite, they don't, they don't have, and they don't do minor sins on a regular basis. So they don't do any major sins, and they don't. So they're not disobedient to their parents. They're not talking back to them. They're not upsetting their parents, and they don't perform minor sins on a regular basis. Though that's an upright witness, so it's very difficult to find an upright witness. So the gathering should be large, because the less upright the people are, the larger the gathering. And then one goes and spreads the news once the contract has been made. Technically, if the witnesses are not there, but they're told before the couple are together, that's okay, as long as the marriage is announced after it's done, so it's not kept secret. So even if the witnesses are not there at the time of the contract, but they're told later before the couple are alone together, and the marriage has been announced, so the news has been spread, you send out emails, you tell people, so people know that the couple is married, and this is before they've been alone together, then that suffices. Okay, guardian. So the first part was the guardian, right? So what are the conditions of a guardian? Unfortunately, a lot of people do not fulfill the conditions of a guardian, but well, let me say this. These are the basic conditions, and then there's some things like righteousness, which it's deficient in a guardian. They're still a guardian. They're still a valid guardian, even though it takes away from some of the, they're a deficient guardian, but they're technically still a guardian. So these are the basic conditions. They don't have to be upright. Of course, it's recommended that they're upright because, they're taking care of their daughters or somebody else's affairs. So it's important that they're upright. Male, they need to be Muslim, and for a Muslim woman only. So if there is a Muslim brother and he has a non-Muslim sister, so he's a convert, or a'udhu billah, she left the deen, a'udhu billah, so he's not her guardian. If she wants to marry, he can't be her guardian if she's going to marry a non-Muslim, so he can't conduct the marriage for them. Free, not a slave, an adult legally, and we went over the conditions. So he does legally need to be an adult, of sound intellect, right? Of sound, so they're able to make basic decisions. They're not deficient in their intellect, where they can't judge right from wrong, things like that. Not in a state of ihram, so they can't be on Hajj or Umrah. They're not on Hajj or Umrah, and this is for the guardian as well as for the couple. And the Prophet ﷺ, the Malikis say that he actually married Sayyidah Maymuna while he was in ihram. But the Malikis consider that to be specific to the Prophet ﷺ, and nobody else can do that. So it wouldn't be valid if the couple, either one of them, were in ihram or the guardian was. So somebody could be of sound intellect, but they're not, but they waste money and things like that. that, somebody needs to talk to, if they feel their guardian is in that category, they need to talk to somebody about that. But if they don't have basic sound intelligence, they can't marry off their daughter. Okay, permissions, because this comes up a lot. Do I need my father's permission? Do I need whose permission do I need? So it's a nuanced answer. It's not black and white. The father, specifically in the Maliki school, may marry off a virgin daughter, so she's never been married before, without her permission, with the condition that he will not harm her. Somebody feels, my father's really out there. I show him the respect he deserves, but I feel he's harming me, and they need to discuss this with the scholar. So harm comes in sundry forms. So what, you have to go to somebody who knows their fiqh and say, okay, this is the harm that my father's, this is what he's doing to me. Is it considered harm shar'an or not? Sometimes we have our own concepts of what's considered harm. It is recommended in any case to seek her permission. So even if she's somebody whom he can marry her off, without her permission, it's recommended to seek her permission. And if she's silent, she should be told, this is what your silence means, is that you're agreeing to this. An adult non-virgin must vocalize her permission, right? As opposed to the virgin whose silence suffices as permission. So she must be asked, right, if she's an adult and not a virgin, and she must vocalize her permission and say, yes, I'm fine, right? So not only does she have to ask, the father have to ask her, but she has to actually say verbally. Just her being silent is not enough. Because somebody who's never been married, they might be very shy. So it's, and that's a beautiful thing that shouldn't be removed from people. The Prophet ﷺ was very shy, and in today's day and age, people are encouraging people not to be shy. And it's mentioned in the hadith that it's one of the traits of this deen, this is modesty. So they describe the Prophet ﷺ as being shyer than a virgin in her own, in her room. The Prophet ﷺ was shyer than that, so it's very praiseworthy. And he was perfect in every attribute, so his shyness would be perfect. A woman may not be married off without the permission of her guardian or someone appointed by a father as the guardian, or paternal male relatives. And I have a chart where I go over the order of the paternal male relatives. It's the same order as the laws of inheritance, because there's male relatives who inherit, and there's female relatives who inherit in the laws of inheritance, and it's the same order. So a woman may not be married off without the permission of her guardian or someone appointed by the father. So the father says to somebody, after I die, you take care of my children's affairs and you marry off my daughter or daughters, if he specifies that, right? It can't be just a general guardian. He actually says that you marry her off. So then that guardian could marry her off if he wishes, if she's a virgin. Again, there has to be, it has to be assumed that there's not going to be any harm, and it needs a lot of detail. If a woman is, okay, this is really important because this changes the category. It changes the whole, everything that was said before, actually this first paragraph about the father and him being able to enact a contract without his virgin daughter's permission. So if the father declares his daughter a Rashida, so she's an adult, and he says, you're in charge of your affairs, I deem you to be of sound judgment, and whatever wording, that makes clear that he's making her Rashida. You're in charge of your affairs, you manage your finances, and so he gives her control of them. Then he can't marry her off without her permission. So in this situation, the father can't marry off a virgin girl without her permission, because he's made her Rashida. That's the word. Okay, this is true even if she has not been previously married, right? So this changes her situation because she's a Rashida. The opposite of Rashida is a Safiha. And the word is mentioned I think it's in the beginning of Surah An-Nisa, and maybe it's in other places, so I definitely mentioned, and it's one of the places that rushd is the word that's mentioned. In the absence of a guardian, so see chart, suitable men for the Muslim community may serve as her guardian. So, I talked about the paternal male relatives, and again, we'll go to the chart in a minute. If none of them are there, then the Muslim community can serve as a guardian. Or if they're harming her or things like that, then you need to ask someone about your situation if you feel you're in it. Okay, the kafil, kafil is a special type of guardian. He is someone who raised the girl. And so there's nothing specific from the father. This man has raised her in her house. She may have been in his care for 4 to 10 years approximately. There's different numbers mentioned in Khalil. So it's not the number per se, but the number is because it's difficult to say to say, okay, so how do you know that he has the level of mercy that he would have for his own sister? That's why they say, well, probably 4 to 10 years. Because that's the thing, is that in the Sharia, you have to judge by the outward, and mercy is something in the heart. So how would you know? Well, if she's been in his care for about 4 to 10 years approximately, and he's been managing her affairs, and obviously he hasn't been harming her. In this case, and in the absence of male guardians, he may act as her guardian, per the dominant opinion. Again, if you're in the situation, you need to ask someone. Now, the guardian must accept the marriage if the husband is suitable. So suitors come, and whoever the guardian is, if he has someone for her and both suitors are of equal status, which is rare, then the choice is hers, right? There's a saying of some scholars, the one who marries off his daughter to a profligate, a disobedient Muslim has certainly severed kinship bonds because it's harming her, right? So it's just because she's from a certain tribe or certain, she's whatever, Punjabi, Balochi, from NWFP, or, Sindhi, or, that's not, we'll go over that. But if that's the only reason that somebody's rejecting a suitor, that could be harming her. The father or appointed guardian may also marry off a non-adult son if there is benefit to the boy, right? Again, if there is benefit to the boy, again, without seeking his permission. So this law is not just for men, or just for girls, it's for men, because boys too, because the idea was that they would not harm her, and they could see things in a suitor that, that somebody, who's not the parent and who's like 20, 30 years younger may not see, because a lot of times suitors can be very charming and they just turn out to be very different when they're married, and somebody who's very young may not see all of that. Okay, the guardian may not marry off a non-adult girl unless the father, prior to his death, so I mentioned this, appointed him specifically to marry off his daughter. So he's not just a general guardian, but he's a guardian, and he was told that, after I pass away, if my daughter's not married, find somebody suitable for her and marry her off. But this is with the condition, again, that the marriage is beneficial to the daughter, right? So it would go back to the previous rules. It is not required that the guardian has the quality of being adl, so he doesn't have to be a righteous person, right? He's still a guardian, even though it's deficient guardianship, but he's a guardian, so all the rules would apply. One who does not commit major sins and is not persistent in minor sins, even if he commits them on occasion, right? He's considered an adl, or righteous person. So this is a technical term, fiqhi term. So one has to ask someone, okay, is this person considered righteous according to the fiqh definition or not? and not what just, you know, what people say has some bearing, but in the end, one has to look at the definition. It is recommended but not required that the guardian appoint a righteous person to perform the contract on his behalf. So if, you know, if the father is, you know, he's not righteous, and he knows that, but he's the guardian. He, you know, or if the father's not there, then the other guardians, maybe they're not righteous. Then it's good to appoint somebody else to do the contract on their behalf, but it's not required. But certainly have more barakah in the contract if the guardian is, if the person performing the contract is righteous. Okay, so this is what we mentioned, the guardian order. So it's a little bit different. This is, again, according to the schools of, according to the order in the laws of inheritance. So this is the obligatory order. The son, so if she's been married previously, she would still need a guardian, right? We said she still needs a guardian, but the rulings would be different in terms of they need to seek her permission. And if it's not the son, then, you know, if she has a grandson, right? The son of the son specifically, not son of the daughter. And father, right? So father is third. But he's actually the only one who can possibly marry her off if she's never been married, as we mentioned, without her permission, if there's no harm. Nobody else can do that. Right? Or somebody that the father appoints. But there's detail to that. So, if the father passes away and he appoints somebody and says, you know, marry her off, her brother, and then if he's not there or not suitable, half paternal brother. Right, so the father had 2 wives, and so he had sons. So they're from, you know, brothers from the father, brother's son, full, and then the paternal. So if it's just maternal, they wouldn't fall into this, they wouldn't be a guardian. Paternal grandfather, paternal uncle, and the sons of paternal uncle, her cousins. So they could be her guardian, and if she's marrying them, they are her guardian and the husband-to-be, and that's fine. And that's fine. It's a valid contract. The guardian, this is a point that, you know, the guardian must be a Rashid. You know, we said the girl is a Rashida, where she's managing her own affairs and she's not wasting her wealth on permissible things. So the guardian, actually, technically, for him to be considered to be a guardian, he shouldn't be wasting his wealth on permissible things. So, because he needs a guardian. So, anyway, if you feel that that's an issue, I would talk to somebody. Okay, if the father permits the grandfather to take care of his, meaning the father's affairs, and this is known in the community that the father tells the grandfather, you know, I'm busy with business and things like that, or he travels a lot and something, and the grandfather is of sound intellect. And it's known in the community that the grandfather does that. Sometimes people, you know, traditionally people would live in the same house, and there was a lot of benefit in that. And the grandfather married off the daughter, and the father approves it soon after. So he comes back from the trip, or he calls him a day or two later and said, you know, I married off my granddaughter. It's a valid marriage contract. Likewise, if there are 2 brothers in a similar situation, one brother's daughter is married off by the other brother, and he finds out, the father finds out soon after. Now, just a point, because somebody I think had asked about this, if the daughter has not been given control over her affairs by the father, so she's not considered a Rashida, she may not go to the other guardians while the father, is still alive. So if she's not a Rashida, she just can't pick whoever she wants, because she's not in charge of her affairs. So the father is has control over affairs. So while he's alive, she can't go to any of the other guardians. Okay, a son seeking permission to marry. So this is some new material. So I wanted to read from Bir al-Walidain, which is written by Muhammad Maulud. He wrote Prohibitions on the Tongue as well. Sorry, I'm going to actually do one thing. The mic is actually pulling a little bit, so I'm just going to move the slide, my table a little bit. Okay, so what happens if the son wants to marry somebody and the father says no? So he says, so he has a whole section actually in Bir al-Walidain on, obedience in relation to nikah. And so he says, that so if the father says you can't marry so-and-so, like a specific woman, and he says that one of the scholars by the name of, great scholars, and his name was Ahmad ibn Muhammad Salim al-Allama al-Majlisi. He said, and he said that so he quotes Ibn Hilal, who is a person of, he's a scholar. He says you have to listen to the father. If he says you can't marry so-and-so, like a specific woman, and he's not saying just don't marry, but he's saying you can't marry a specific woman, you have to listen to him. So that was the opinion of, that was what Ibn Hilal said. But you get into difference of opinion about whether, somebody's already married and then, they say you have to leave her. Some of them said, no, you don't have to listen to the father or the mother. And some of them said you do. So there's difference of opinion. But this is about marriage. So inshallah, when we do the section on divorce, inshallah, next week we can go over that in a little bit more detail. But the father can't say you just can't marry, period. But he can say, you can't marry a specific woman, because he says you can't marry at all. You don't have to obey them, but it needs to be done with good adab. So again, there's a difference between telling him not to marry a specific woman versus telling him to leave marriage completely. So in the first, as I mentioned, one of the scholars mentioned you would have to listen to him. And the second, no, you don't have to listen to him. So in general, filial piety is the rule, except if it contradicts that which is obligatory or prohibited. So if somebody's going to do haram, if they don't marry, then they would have to listen. They would, they still act with adab towards their parents. They don't raise their voice. They don't argue or anything, but they try to convince them. They try to get somebody else to convince them. They do whatever they can. They do a lot of dua. They, make dua for their parents. It's a test from Allah, and tests are they remove our sins, and they also elevate us in rank. So one has to say, okay, what am I doing? Is this because of things I've done in the past that I need to make tawbah for, or there's things I'm doing now that are sinful that's causing this tribulation? One needs to reflect on one's life and see what one is doing. Maybe I'm going to be oppressive to this person, and that's why there's a block. Maybe it's teaching me patience. I'm growing spiritually from this. So one has to think about, without, and talk to people who are older, wiser, who are not going to gossip, and just, give you some words of wisdom. That's really, really important. Okay, and then it's not permissible for her or for her guardian to forego the right of eligibility in terms of religion. So if for the girl, a suitable person comes, and a woman can, there's a hadith that a woman is married for four things, right? This is what people do. They marry for all four or one of the four, and one of those four is religion, right? Beauty, religion, wealth, and hal, or social standing. One can forego all of the other ones except for religion, right? So kafa'a is eligibility of the suitor, or it has a lexical meaning or original meaning in the Arabic language, which meant similarity or mutually being almost the same, right? So religion, right? In fiqh of marriage, two things are considered: religion and hal. Religion, of course, is the most important, as mentioned in the hadith, right? That he's not a fasiq, because if she's a fasiq, but he's amir over her, he can change her. But if he's a disobedient Muslim and he's saying don't do this, don't do that, and then she's there's things she can't obey him in, right? But it becomes very, very difficult, right? And he can, somebody can make somebody's life very difficult. Okay, hal, which is per the later scholars, hasab or nasab. Hasab is belong to a respectable family, people in nobility, like they're sharifs, they're from the Prophet's family, they're knowledgeable, they're upright. Nasab is lineage. So all these one can forego, but not religion. And religion is relative to the time one lives in. So, one has to consider, okay, I'm going to be, we're in the end of time. I'm also growing spiritually, and I don't want to have very high standards. And the important thing is just to do istikhara, and that Allah will make clear to you. And just make a lot of dua for the person you're going to marry. Now, I just mentioned this. There's this beautiful hadith about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I'm just going to bold it, where the Sayyidina Umar, this was after the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed away. He talked about the kafa'a, that nobody was suitable, quote unquote. Nobody was at the level of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Sayyidina Umar thought about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he said, he was crying, may my mother and father be your ransom, O Messenger of Allah. Had you chosen to keep the company of only those who were comparable to you, you would not have kept our company. Had you married only those who are equal to you, you would not have married from us. Had you trusted only those who are your equal, you would have not have confided in any of us. But indeed, and I testify to this, right? So it's, to testify, because he's sure of it. By Allah, he's swearing by Allah, you kept our company and you married from us, right? Sayyidina Umar's daughters, Sayyidina Sophia, Sayyidina Hafsa was married to Sayyidina Umar. You confided in us and you wore wool, so rough fabric, and you rode a donkey, and it was one of the signs of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It was mentioned in the other books that he would ride a donkey, and you had others ride sitting behind you, because kings wouldn't do that, right? Nobody would sit with them on their animal, and they wouldn't ride donkeys. SubhanAllah. So it's humility of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now everybody wants fancy cars, and they don't want to do with the simple car, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam rode a donkey. SubhanAllah, the best of creation. Sitting behind you, so the Prophet would put people, they would sit behind him. Some of the children, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam came into Medina, they would come and he would pick them up, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if I remember the hadith correctly, and he would put them behind him, and they would ride into Medina together. One of my teachers was saying they would stop. There was a station, quote unquote, the marhala. Before they got into Medina, they would stop and they would send message, spend the night there, and then they would enter Medina in the day, so the women and the wives would have time to get ready, and they would send message out to to the people of Medina that that they were returning, and it has all these fiqh rulings and stuff, and so when people knew the Prophet was coming back, some of the children would run to him, subhanallah. and you placed your food on the ground. Now, subhanAllah, so many people don't want to sit on the ground, and you licked your fingers out of sheer humility. And again, I mentioned the Shamal, Sheikh Muhammad al-Yaqubi mentioned that it's not sticking one's finger in the mouth, but kind of, just like one gnaws a piece of bone that has meat on it. That's kind of how one takes the food off of one's fingers. May Allah send His peace and prayers upon you. It's a beautiful hadith. Okay, so the husband so neither the wife or the husband actually have to be there for the time of the contract. They can actually appoint anybody. So he can appoint, so her guardian, not they, but he can appoint anyone, a woman or a discerning child, but she would have to, her guardian would be there, and then she doesn't have to be there. She can't appoint just anyone. But the husband can appoint anyone because divorce is in his hands, so he can, that's why there's more rules for her, and making sure that somebody is suitable, the person is suitable for her, and Allah guide the men, make them suitable guardians. Now, it is permitted to mention a deficiency, but this must be done indirectly. She's not suitable for you. So if the spouse wants a virgin, it is their right, whether male or female. But one is not permitted before or after marriage to speak about illicit encounters, and it causes a lot of problems, and it's not permissible. So something that Allah has veiled, you're not supposed to talk about it. And anything that happens in the house between spouses, in the privacy of their homes, one's not supposed to talk about those private matters. And there's hadith indicating that, about how evil that person is, who, they're basically intimate, and then they go outside, then they talk about it. So one shouldn't be speaking about these issues unless there's issues, and you need to talk to somebody who's going to give you objective advice with knowledge. In general, it is not permissible to disclose past sins to anyone. So if somebody was not wearing hijab, or they shouldn't talk about it to anyone. That's the veil that Allah Ta'ala gave you, and alhamdulillah, it's a blessing. And one's sinning by disclosing that, generally speaking. It is impermissible to keep the company of a disobedient Muslim, and marriage is more than this. It is worse that the husband is a disobedient Muslim, as he is Amir over her, whereas if she is a disobedient Muslim, but he is righteous, his influence may be a means to her positive change. A repentant Muslim is an exception, but both parties have their rights as well. So she may not want somebody who's, had relations, and she needs to make that clear. But then once they're married, they don't talk about it. I mentioned a beautiful story that Sheikh Muhammad al-Yaqubi mentions in his CDs on the Fiqh of Marriage, how somebody came to Sheikh Muhammad's father, who was the main teacher of Sheikh Muhammad. And this man came, and he had somehow found out, I guess on the wedding night, that his wife wasn't a virgin, and I guess he was, and he came and talked to Sheikh Muhammad's father, and I think one of the first questions Sheikh Muhammad's father asked is, "Did you let her know?" And he said no, and basically told him not to, and to keep it as a secret, and to not let her know, and that advised him to stay with her and things like that. And so apparently, and the man, I think, was coming regularly to the Sheikh Muhammad's father, so mashallah, he covered it. And that's ihsan, that's giving up your right, and assuming that, I'm assuming that he was sure that, she wasn't, and he was. So that's ihsan, mashallah, that reward for veiling somebody's sins. They're actually your spouse. You're giving up your right to something, subhanallah, and you're controlling your temper, subhanallah, so many things, so much reward in that. That's ihsan. Conditions that are contrary to the aims and purposes of marriage as per the sacred law are cancelled if consummation has occurred. But prior to consummation, the nikah contract itself is nullified. It's cancelled. It's like it didn't happen. So somebody says, "I'm only going to sleep with you once a week." That's it. So if it's before the consummation, then it would be cancelled, because it's contrary to the aims and purpose of marriage, because the spouses have rights. The nikah, if it's after consummation, then the condition would be nullified. So if it's canceled, there's no, it's like it didn't happen, so it doesn't count as a divorce. If they remarry, it doesn't count as a divorce towards their marriage. If the father or the guardian refuses, so if the father does not give permission for someone who is suitable, right? So somebody's suitable for her, he's the right religion. If she's a Rashida, meaning, again, he's considered, so she's a Rashida, he's given her control of her affairs, and he said, you can manage your affairs. And then he stops her from somebody who's suitable. He's considered as blocking her. It's called, Aldullah is the past tense verb that's used, even if he stops her once, because she's a Rashida. So even if one suitor comes who is a suitable match, so it's assumed that she's acting with, proper judgment. That's assumed, right? But if she's not, then, she needs to be careful about harming herself. Her father may have a lot of wisdom, and he may have seen that she can manage her affairs, but then he sees something wrong in the guardian, in the suitor. So if she's not a Rashida, so he's still managing all her affairs, and she's a virgin, right, then he may prevent her. And if there is harm in his doing so, he is considered as preventing her from marriage if he stops her even once. So if it's clear that, this is a righteous person and she really wants to get married, and, even somebody who's of deficient intellect, like she doesn't have her full intellect, even somebody who's majnoon, who's mad, they're not considered of a sound intellect, they can marry, and because they might have the desire to marry. And if somebody suitable is found for them, they should marry, and the parents should not. They're oppressive if they're preventing them. So if somebody could be, they're simpletons, for example, or they're insane, but they wouldn't harm their spouse, and the spouse is also deficient intellect, or somebody goes in and out of sanity. They make that clear to people. Sometimes people have psychological issues. If somebody comes to propose to them, the parents can't stop them, and they're oppressive if they do so. She may raise the matter to a Muslim judge, right, or a group of Muslims in the absence of a judge. So we really need that in this community, where a group of Muslims in the absence of a judge, they're actually helping people, because a lot of times sisters will get married, issues come up, and maybe people haven't studied the Farad Ain before they get married, and then all these issues come up, and there's no recourse. If he does this repeatedly, he's considered as blocking her marriage, even if there's no apparent harm in it. So she's not a Rashida, right? He hasn't given her control of her affairs, but he's repeatedly blocking her for somebody who's suitable for her. So in this case, even though she's not a Rashida, but if it happens repeatedly, then he's considered as blocking her. But if he's given her control of her affairs, and he blocks her even once for marrying somebody who's suitable, right? Have to go back to the old slide. Then he's considered as blocking her. So you have to ask someone, Okay, proposing to the same girl. So if a couple has decided to marry, but have not yet, another suitor may not propose to this girl. However, it is permitted for a righteous man to propose to a girl if the person she has decided to marry is not a practicing Muslim. So he doesn't pray all the time. He prays, but he backbites. He mixes with men and women. He hasn't left major sin, or he's doing minor sins. Sometimes he's not good to his parents, things like that. And then somebody righteous, somebody with really beautiful character, they're studied their fiqh, their Farad Ain, and, they propose to her. Then she can, even if she's accepted the proposal of the first one, but because the first one is not righteous, she can refuse it. And she can refuse it anyway, but he can propose to her. And it's not haram for him to do that. And it's not like he's being arrogant, but it's permissible for him. Allah, all good character is from Allah, so he sees that as a blessing, that Allah has given him good parents, or he was raised in a good family, and so he's a good practicing Muslim, and he's seeing that this girl that he's interested in is, she's engaged to somebody who's not very practicing. And he can propose to her, even if she's engaged, because she's not married. So But if the person she's engaged to is practicing and they're righteous Muslim, then and she's engaged to him, he cannot then propose to her. He may look, so it's like you're looking at girls. The man may look at the face and the hands only, and nothing else, But he shouldn't be staring. He just looks. But in the process, one has to be careful, especially if you're engaged, joking, laughing. It's not permitted and would be considered flirting. It's haram. One must be extra careful in these situations because one's not going to flirt with somebody on the bar, right? Somebody sitting next to you and you maybe see them, once a year or something on bar. But it's in these situations where a lot of impermissible stuff happens and it takes away from the barakah. So one's walking into a marriage potentially with a lot of haram, and then people wonder why there's so many marital problems. So, if we want Allah Ta'ala's help, we need to abide by His rules. We should abide by His rules, just because He told us to. But, if I'm in somebody's house and they told me you can do these such and such, but you can't do these other things, and I just decide to, but the person is very generous and they've given me a lot of gifts and a lot of things, they've let me do a lot of things then, but I proceed to, for example, go into the rooms they told me not to, things like that. It's ingratitude just from, if you're looking at it between two human beings, so what about with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So it's, and, for Allah Ta'ala's anger is His punishment, and so a lot of times there's tribulation because people have done stuff that's impermissible, and they need to make tawbah, and this is something that needs to be discussed, that okay, once we get engaged, we're not going to talk until the nikah. And then this is something just going back to somebody who does not possess any of these attributes. So because it's mentioned in the hadith that a woman is typically married for one of four reasons, right? Hal and qada is basically, like I said, lineage, social status. Religion is the best, as mentioned in the hadith. Wealth, beauty. This is the reality of it, right? Of human beings. They usually marry a woman for these reasons. So say she doesn't have any of these. She's still learning her deen, and there's just a lot of work she needs to do, and she doesn't have any of these. So is it permissible for her to appoint a non-relative to be her guardian or not? Even if there are other guardians, there's difference of opinion in this. But there's an opinion that in the absence of a father, she may choose anyone as a guardian if her father is not there. Somebody who's in this situation who doesn't have any of these attributes that are typically sought in a woman for marriage. Okay, it is obligatory, and then we'll take a break maybe after that. It is obligatory for the two witnesses, but not the guardian, to be upright. Right, so again, because the witnesses are witnessing, and this is from the Sharia. An upright person is the one who does not commit major sins at all, and is not persistent with minor sins, which is, again, they don't backbite, they're not mixing with men and women, they're not sitting and watching stuff. Even these sports games now, with the tight pants and. Or tight, at least in America, what these football players are wearing, it's not permissible to look at that. Well, Malikis are very strict, astaghfirullah, Allah forgive us for anything we've seen that's impermissible, that if something's not permissible to do, it's not permissible to watch it. Right, so even men watching other men, starting their dancing around in these tights, they're not allowed to look at that. You can pretty much see everything, right? It's like they're not dressed. So in addition, he or she is someone who would not engage in undignified matters, such as she look, right? So that's an upright person. That's Allah give us tawfiq to be upright people. So Muhammad Maulud, again, the one who wrote Birrul Walidain, Prohibitions of the Tongue, and I mentioned what he said about, the son having to listen to his father. if the father says you can't, or the mother says you can't marry so-and-so. Anyway, so scholar Muhammad Maulud, West African scholar, states that the definition of what is considered upright